Hello everyone, welcome back to our React tutorial series. In our previous video, we talked about React states. We learned what state is, how to use state in our React application, how to update our state, and why we need state to update our components. In this video, we are going to talk about React events and how to handle user interactions. The interactions remain the click events, the input changes, and all of that. So we're going to cover how React handles events, handling button clicks in React, handling input changes in React, handling form submissions in React, and of course, how to prevent default browser behaviors. By the end of this video, you'll be able to capture and respond to users' actions in your application. So let's jump into understanding what events are in React.js. Just like in plain JavaScript, React allows us to handle events using event handler. But in React, event handling is slightly different. So what made event handling different in React.js? One, we say React events are synthetic events. What do we mean by synthetic events? We say React event uses its own event system called synthetic event, which wraps native browser events for better performance and compatibility. As we proceed, we're going to demonstrate all of these. So what made React events different from our plain JavaScript event? One, we say React events are synthetic events. So what do we mean by synthetic events? React uses its own event system called synthetic event, which wraps native browsers event for a better performance and compatibility. We're going to demonstrate all of this when we proceed to coding. And we also have in mind that React event handlers are in camel cased or are camel cased. They follow the camel case convention, right? Unlike what we have in plain JavaScript. How does this React event occur? What are the flows and what are the different stages? When an event is triggered, from here, see the first block here is the user interaction, which means a user has triggered an event. See, a user clicks a button, types in an input field, or performs another action. These are actions that will trigger the event. When a user does that, an event is triggered. So when an event is triggered, what happens? The event handler updates the component state using the useState or setState. Right. So maybe the button clicked was supposed to update something, was supposed to change the color. We talked about state. We have a state called red, and when I click on the button, I'm supposed to update that state, and I'm going to update that color to blue. This is what happens here. The state is being updated based on what I want to achieve. When that is done, the UI is re-rendered, right? Because of course we are seeing a background color of red, and if I click a button, the background color is changing to blue. That means the UI is re-rendering. But see what happens here. React re-renders the component with updated state, modifying the virtual DOM. If you follow our series, you understand that when an event occurs, React does not reload or refresh everything in your web application. It only scans through the virtual DOM and updates the particular component that is involved. In this case, it is the component that we're changing its background color from red to blue. So this is how event happens in React.js. So now let's jump over to our code editor and demonstrate how to handle events, trigger events, and use events to update our state and of course update our user interface. So yeah, we're back to our project. This is the project we've been using from the beginning of this series, and we're going to demonstrate how events are being triggered. And the first event we're going to consider is the click event. And to do that, we're going to create a button component and see how that is done. So I'm going over to the component folder, and I'm going to create a file called buttons.jsx. I'm going to save that, and of course from our knowledge in components creation, I'm going to export this button. Export function buttons, and I'm only going to export a button. So I'm going to title this button trigger click event. When I save this button, so let's start our project. I'm going to start my project by saying npm run dev. As my project is running on port 5173, I'm going to visit my project. I'm going to say yeah, nothing is there. The page is blank. That is because we created a component and we need to, of course, import the component in our app.js. So here I'm going to import my buttons component in my app.js. See, from here I have the button imported from my component. If I save this and I go back to my browser, I have a button. So what is the next thing to do? So for components like button, we're going to add on-click event. Remember, when a user clicks a button, something is supposed to happen. So the event we're going to trigger is the on-click event. So I'm going to create the event handler, which is going to be on-click. So I'm going to say function click handler. I'm going to say function click handler, and I'm just going to say console. I'm going to write to my log console, and I'm going to say hello, you click the button. Hello, you click the button. So what happens if I go back here and I click on this? Nothing still happens. So let me open my developer tool so we can monitor our console when we log. So nothing still happens. If I click on it, nothing happens. So how do we now append this handler to this component? Remember we talked about prop. So I'm going to pass this handler as a prop to this component, and I'm going to say, I'm going to create a prop called handler, which of course is going to hold my event handler. If I save this and I still go back and click on the button, nothing will still happen. Why? Because we've not used this prop in our primary component. So let's go over to our button component, and let's say we are expecting a handler, a prop called handler. And from what you can see here, I'm adding an event listener. What is an event listener? This is the on-click event that will trigger the event, that will trigger the click event. So whenever you can see this as an attribute. Remember, if you're from the HTML and CSS, this can be regarded as an attribute. But see what happens here. It is in camel case, right? It is in camel case. Remember, I said the difference between plain JavaScript events and event handlers and React event handlers is that React event handlers are in camel case, right? So if you see this, if I click on this button, this should happen. Let's see if this will actually happen. So if I click on this, you're going to see hello, you clicked on a button. So this is the easiest way to trigger an event using the click event and using an event handler, the on-click event handler, the handler to trigger the click event. Now let's see how we can trigger an event in a form. So we're going to see how we can monitor the changes in a form. When a user starts typing, filling a form, how we can trigger the changes, the change event, and capture the input the user is inputting, the data the user inputting rather. So how do we demonstrate that? For example, you have a sign up page where user puts in their phone number, puts in their name, puts in their address. You need to capture this data. When you click a button, you need to capture this data. So we're going to first of all see how to handle changes in input forms, in inputs rather, and see how we can save that in it. So from this, that means we're going to create. Should we create a new component? No. Okay, let's just use, so we're going to rename this from buttons because we want to add more components to form components, right? We're going to name this as form.jsx, which means it will also affect, this. So nothing changed, right? If we click on this still works. So we're going to add input to this. Remember, the React components are rendered in single parent. That means I'm going to wrap this around this so we can have inputs here. We can have input. So when you have an input, we're going to have a type of text, and of course we're going to give it a placeholder of enter your name, and we're going to monitor the onChange event of this input. So let's say onChange event handler. So when we change this input, what should happen? So we'll go back to our app.jsx, and we're going to create a function that will trigger our onChange event. So say function input change handler, right? Input change handler, and I'm just going to input out whatever is the callback variable. We'll have the values here. We have the event.target.value. This holds whatever data the user tries to input and type in the input component. So I'm going to pass this as a component, but before then I'm going to also export. So this is going to be sorry about that, this is going to be a form component, right? This is going to be a form component, so we don't call it button component anymore. We're going to name this to form component, and when I save this, we'll come back here to say in our form component, we're also going to expect we created a function here, which is our input change handler. We're also going to pass this as a prop to the form component. We're also going to pass this as a prop to the form component, so that when we save this and go back to the form component, we're going to have this as the prop, and of course we're going to pass it in here. So what did we do? When we have an input that is a text and it's taking our name, when we start inputting our names, we need to trigger an event. And what is the event we are triggering? The event we are triggering is the input change handler, which of course is just logging the data we're typing in our console. So let's test this out. If we go back, and we have to clear this. So if we start typing, if I type H, you will see that the terminal, my console is changing. So if I come back here to type in my name, if I say Aminibo Paul, so you're going to see at the end of the day, you're going to see Aminibo Paul as the value the user is typing in the input. But this is not what we want to achieve. We want a situation where after typing and I click on this button, I should see the data I've already typed in my input. So how do we achieve that? We'll go back to our input change handler, and we're going to comment out this. We're going to comment out this. And of course, we're going to create a state so that this data is being stored in a state and we can actually read our state. So I'm going to create a state. I'm going to create a full name state. I'm going to say const name and set name should be equal to use state. Of course, remember to import use state from React, right? So by default, my name state is empty. So I'm also going to pass in the set name as an attribute or a prop to the form element, the form component rather. I'm going to pass it as a prop to the form component. Should I do that? No, this is not necessary. So React, that is not necessary. What we're supposed to do is to update, is to set the name when we trigger the input change handler. Please take note of this. When we trigger the input change handler, we're setting a state, and the state we're setting is the name of the user, which of course is the data we're getting from the input. So we are calling the set name, which is going to set this name state, right? If we do that, it means whenever we type, the data is being set in our state, and we can have access to it from this name variable. And how do we do that? We're just going to say, when you click a button, say hello, say hello, your name is whatever the state is. So this is going to be hello, your name is whatever the data in the input. That is going to happen when you click the button, right? That is going to happen when you click the button. So let's try this out and see what happens. We're going to go back here and we're going to say Aminibo Paul. So when I do this and I click, I'm going to say hello, your name is Aminibo Paul. So this is how to trigger on change event and trigger on click event. And when we do that, we combine the two to fetch the data the user is trying to submit in our form. So the next event we're going to look at is the submit event. The submit event is always appended to a form. It helps you to submit a form without using the onClick event, and we're going to see how that is done. So first of all, go over to our form component, and we're going to wrap our input and our button in a form, in a HTML form, right? If we do this, we're then going to add an attribute, which is of course an event handler called on submit. So when we submit this form, what should happen? Instead of having the handler being appended to the button, let us trigger the handler when a form is submitted. And before we can do that, we then need to take out this and add a type for this button. So the type is going to be submit. So it's going to tell the browser that if I click this button, I want to submit this form, right? You understand the changes? Event handler is now in the form. We took it out from the button and we added a type attribute to the button to specify that the button is supposed to be changed. So this is how to add the onSubmit event handler. And when we save this, we go back, we're going to encounter a problem that will lead us to our next subtopic. So when I click on this, when I put in my name, of course, Aminibo Paul, and I click this button, something happens. Nothing writes to our console and the page reloads. So, and we've been saying that React does not reload our page, it only updates the necessary components. So that brings us to handling the default browser behavior using what is called prevent default behavior. So we're going to prevent the browser default behavior like reloading the page when we submit a form. And how do we do that? We do that by using the event.prevent default method. This is a built-in method in JavaScript that helps us to prevent the default submission of a form. So let's go back to our code to see how that is done. We go back to our form component to make sure everything is correct. Everything is correct. So we'll go over to our app.js. In our click handler, we need to do something. We need to get back the callback event, and we need to say event.prevent default. So this method helps us to prevent the default behavior of a browser, prevent it from reloading when we submit a form. So if we save this and we'll go back to our browser, let's just reload this and clear our terminal. And if we put in our name, Aminibo Paul, and I click on this button, the page did not reload, and we have a terminal. Hello, your name is Aminibo Paul, right? If I change my name to Aminibo Chinome, which is of course my native name, and I click on this button, you're going to see, hello, your name is Aminibo Chinome. So everything is working perfectly. We talked about the onClick event, we talked about the onChange event, and now we're talking about the onSubmit event. These are the three major events in form submission in React and in JavaScript generally. So guys, that is it for React event handling. You've learned how to capture user actions like click, text input change, and form submission. What are your key takeaways? We talked about onClick event for button clicks, onChange for input updates, onSubmit for some form submission, and of course, we also talked about the event.prevent default method that stops your page from reloading when we submit a form. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button please, subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss out in our next video. In our next video, we're going to talk about React form and controlled component. See you guys in the next video. Bye.